Recently, I played through Cult of the Lamb for the first time, and it quickly became one of my favourite games of all time. The art and music drew me in the most, on par with games like Hollow Knight, Tunic, and maybe even Fall Guys, but I was slightly let down by the combat, mainly the boss fights. I've beaten a lot of final bosses in a lot of games, and none of them had me this disappointed. I'll give a quick overview of who the boss is so this makes more sense. The One Who Waits, or Narinder, is the main antagonist and final boss of Cult of the Lamb. He's an infamously powerful figure in the world of the game, seeing as he's literally the god of death. In fact, he was so strong and dangerous that 4 other gods, also his siblings, chained him up and locked him away in purgatory for eternity in an attempt to stop him from destroying the world. To stop this, he uses you, the protagonist, as a vessel to kill his siblings and set himself free, and at the end of the game, he tells you to sacrifice yourself in his name. In a pretty cliche fashion, you refuse to do it, and he acts as the final boss. This all sounds good, and yeah, it would make for a climactic and awesome fight, if it was done well, which it definitely wasn't. Narinder's boss fight consists of 4 phases, which still sounds promising at first, until we find out that the first couple of phases are just easy and empty fights between these 2 edgelord wolf nerd followers that fight one after the other. Now, I hold nothing against boss fights with multiple separate enemies, but they don't even fight at the same time. If it was like Ornstein and Smough in Dark Souls, I could see it working great, or like everyone's favourite duo boss, Foreskin Duo. These 2 dudes also take up half of the entire boss fight, so you only get to fight Narinder after them. The worst part is, when you finally do fight him, it's just as boring. Quick reminder, this guy literally controls death, and he turns out to be way easier and more boring than any of the other major bosses. Just look at Kalamar, the last boss of the 3rd area, and compare him to Narinder. This guy's just a Flexar Sentry ripoff, but manages to be way more intense and satisfying than the final boss of the game. I expected something to do with reviving the other bishops and using their powers or something, which would have actually matched with the theme of death surrounding his character, but there's nothing like that, and he doesn't do anything death related in his entire fight. Malekith did it way better. To make things worse, the final phase is sadly even more boring. Look at the form he takes here. It's pretty cool, and kind of reminds me of the Demogoop character in that Strange Thinger show. Now look at the actual gameplay of the fight. Yep, that's it. You fight 3 little eyeballs that float around like shriveled nutsacks spitting out yellow balls. They're essentially reskins of the wrinkly raisin enemies in the water area. This is the final fight of this huge game, a battle against the god of death, the last stand to save your cult and finally become free of Narinder's grueling demands and order. But the fight itself is literally just Shadows of Yharnam Eyeballs edition. Narinder doesn't even move for the whole fight, at all, he just sits there having a whinge. They could have done something like the Rayman Nacho Libre guy with the big swiping punches across the ground. Or maybe a rain attack like Shrieking Ori or Bowser. That would have made the fight at least a bit more engaging and fun, but sadly that isn't the reality. This sucked for me, because Cult of the Lamb is genuinely great, and still one of my favourite games, as every other aspect of it is almost perfect and I wouldn't change a thing. But this boss fight was just straight up disappointing. For a final boss to be a good final boss, it needs to be challenging, innovative, and should serve as a culmination of everything the game is about, its mechanics, themes, and combat. Sword Saint Ishin from Sekiro and Yang from Sifu are great examples of this. Both of these dudes are insanely hard and have super unique movesets, and are also both old ninja grandpas. Quick side note, if Narinder had a secret 5th phase where his grandpa crawled out of his neck, I would change my mind in a heartbeat. Ishin and Yang are prime examples of almost perfect final bosses, alongside ones like Soul of Cinder, Hades, Sans, The Radiance, Shriek, Abby, and of course, the Cursed Thorn. Narinder doesn't come near any of these boss fights, especially the Cursed Thorn. And reminds me a lot of the final boss of Katana Zero, Headhunter, but for different reasons. Headhunter's really weird, because she's just a random lady that you only see right at the end of the game that dies in 3 hits. Now I get that Katana Zero is Katana Zero, you have a Giga Sword and every enemy dies immediately, but couldn't they have done something like that zesty pink dude's boss fight where you deflect a few times? The fight lasts about 20 seconds, and while it is still difficult, I think it really should have been longer. Headhunter and Narinder both suffer for completely opposite reasons. Naranda was hyped up as a terrifying god figure with immense world-ending power, but the actual fight was just drawn out and felt uninspired. Headhunter on the other hand just sort of appeared and made you fight her, and was way too short and fast to mean anything to me. Another thing I want to talk about is what is probably my biggest disappointment in gaming history: Elden Ring boss fights. Now this is controversial, but honestly, I kind of hate every Elden Ring boss. I can't name a single major boss fight I look back on positively, the sole exception being my true love, Fire Giant. The reason I dislike the bosses could have been because of my build, which was entirely strength and melee based, and I think most can agree the game is quite unbalanced when you don't have any access to ranged attacks or summons. While this problem can be easily avoided by just playing the game with the Dex Mage Galaxy Shitstorm build, it's still a valid problem and made the majority of boss fights a slog for me, rather than something fun and memorable. I didn't play Elden Ring for a full year after I reached Altus Plateau for the first time, but mainly because I found Draconic Tree Sentinel. That was my breaking point. Replaying the game last year, I did have a good time overall, but looking back I can't help remember the pain that Morgott, Godfrey, Mohg, Malenia and Malekith, especially Malekith, caused me. Seriously, fuck that dude. I know I said he's better than Naranda near the start of this video, but that doesn't mean I don't hate this guy in his shitty sack clothes, but I will give him credit for having one of the coolest lines in all of Elden Ring.
Oh, death. Become my blade once more.
Ultimately, when I think back on the Soulsborne series, excluding Elden Ring, my first thoughts are always about how good the boss fights are, as they are the highlights of From Software's games. Bosses like Abyss Watchers, Soul of Cinder, the Divine Dragon, Gwyn, Mike Tyson, and Artorias all come to mind, and I love them all, and I really wish I could say that about Elden Ring. I know this is a final boss video, and this is kind of just general boss fight talk, so I will talk about Radagon for a couple seconds. He's pretty cool, and to be honest, I enjoyed him a lot more than others. At the end of the day, I guess the takeaway of this video is to never meet your heroes. Thanks for watching this. It's my first time doing something in this style. It was actually really fun, writing the script, editing, and polishing it all, and you can definitely expect more of this in the future. So yeah, I guess you should subscribe if you're interested.